Hi, welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and I'm joined today by a really amazing woman that I met at an adoption and foster conference several years ago. This is Jenn Hook. Hi, welcome, Jenn.
Hi, Carrie. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Jenn, I am really interested in your story because we met at an adoption conference, and you are training and helping other parents with adoption and foster parenting, and yet you're not a parent.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me because most people who come into this world, it's out of survival, it's out of, oh my gosh, I've got to figure something out. And that's not your story. And I would really love to hear, pardon me, a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Wheaton College and got my master's degree in clinical psychology. And after I graduated, I got a job as a therapist in the foster care system in Illinois. And so I was doing trauma counseling with all these kiddos that had been impacted by foster care, 3-year-olds up to 18-year-olds. And my heart just was really kind of torn open for the reality of what foster care is and what our kiddos have gone through.
And can you share a little bit about that? Like, what were you seeing?
Yeah. So, I would sit in counseling sessions with kiddos that, had experienced a lot of different abuse. I remember a little girl that for the first almost 3 months of counseling, all she could do was come into the room and just sit in my lap and cry. And she would just soak my shirt. And so you knew the reality of her experience was deep, and she couldn't put words to her experience yet. And so part of my job was to come alongside of our kiddos that had experienced all these wounds and help them with their healing process. I had a lot of kids too. I do a lot of play therapy and TBRI, sand tray therapy, things like that with kids, and helping them work through the different experiences that they've had and experience some reconciliation with those wounds.
Can you also say what TBRI is, just for those who don't know?
Oh, yeah, TBRI is trust-based relational intervention. So it's intervention that is very specific to kids who have experienced trauma, and it's all about repairing and healing through relationship and through connection, because a lot of our kids with trauma have been hurt through relationship, and so they have a lot of ruptured trust and attachment. And so I would sit in counseling rooms with kids that, were just had so many big feelings. We would always talk about big feelings. And especially in foster care, a lot of our kiddos, it was complex, and so they were taken from families that they had known and loved, and placed in new homes. And so there was all this confusion and turmoil and, numbness that they were experiencing, or and just grief and loss, and then also just pain and wounds that they'd experienced, and the reasons that they were brought into foster care. And so that was really hard for a lot of my kids to reconcile. And then also just like falling in love with foster parents, right? And so there's just...
They are a special group of people, aren't they?
Yeah, really are. Absolutely. But, for a 3-year-old, that is a lot, right? To try to understand what foster care even is, what's going on, why they're living with people they don't know. And so trying to give kids permission for all their feelings and experiences was a big part of what I was doing in counseling. But one of the things that really struck me as well was a lot of my kids were almost embarrassed they were in foster care, and they didn't know how to talk about it, didn't want their friends to know about it. And so I remember this little boy, he was 7 years old. His sister had been sexually abused by their mom's boyfriend. And so they were brought into foster care. And he was so tormented with the fact that he wasn't able to protect his sister, that at 7 years old, he was breaking glass and trying to cut his wrists at 7, and so the pain was just so strong and visceral for him. But he also, a lot of our kids don't know how to talk to their peers about what they've been through, right? And so to shut it down, they don't
know how to even process it themselves, let alone how to talk to a friend.
Or I had kids that were like, I don't want my foster parents to pick me up from school because then people are going to ask questions about why we look different, and they didn't know how to answer those questions, right? And of course you don't when you're 6 years old,
You don't as an adult, Yeah,
exactly. So a lot of my kids were just, it was just really hard. It was a hard journey. And so part of my job was to come alongside them and to just really love them, connect, help them heal through their trauma experiences, give voice to what they had experienced as well, and empower them. And then also to work with the families. And that's really where I was seeing like, man, our foster parents were so awesome, but they felt so alone, and they're responding to a lot of the emotional and behavioral things that our kids are portraying because of their trauma. And a lot of times our kids are really misunderstood by people outside of the foster care journey. And so they get labeled as those like bad kids or dysregulated,
Right.
you know? And so I was seeing these parents just giving it their all to help the kids experience healing, loving them unconditionally, and feeling so alone and isolated in their experience. And so it was during that time that I was just like, where is the church in this? Like, our churches need to be going beyond the message of like, yeah, adoption and foster care is a great
Love
thing.
is all it takes.
Yeah, the cause of the fatherless is, go do it, right? It can't just be like, yes, you should do this journey and then not show up anywhere when our families are saying yes to that journey. And so I just saw that that was really what was happening in a lot of our areas. In the Illinois area, there really wasn't any post-placement support available to our parents and to our kids.
Well, and can I just speak into that
Yeah.
just for a second? That's our story, is that
Yeah.
we adopted from Vietnam and had all kinds of problems, and were looking for help and seeking help and paying for it all out of our own insurance. And thankfully we had great insurance, so it took care of a lot of it. But we would go to the church, we would go to the church, we would go to the church, and basically their response was, take it to your small group.
Yeah.
So we'd take it to our small group, and that would overwhelm them, and then they'd say take it to the pastor, and we're getting these conflicting things, and they were not there.
Yeah.
And then when we ended up having to dissolve an adoption and place a child in another home because the trauma that had come in, and we thought we were prepared. We did all the training, and it was our second adoption, and we were successful, and all of that. No one understood. And so the judgment and the condemnation from our church, we lost our church over it. We lost our small group. The only help we found was in the private sector.
Yeah.
So yes, what you're doing and what you saw is right on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why we started Replanted, because I was seeing, and ultimately too, when parents aren't supported and, are completely overwhelmed and people aren't supporting them well, a lot of times I would see in the foster care system, a lot of my kiddos would go from multiple placement to multiple placement, and that's more trauma on the kiddos. Mm-hmm. And it's traumatic for the parents too, right?
Absolutely.
Like they're doing the best they can, and then no one is around them, and a lot of my families that were part of the Replanted ministry would even say, the church was so excited for us when we said we were going to adopt or we were going to start the foster care journey. And then like 3 months later, when the reality and the expectations didn't match, a lot of my family said almost 90% of the support totally vanished. And how hurtful is that to our parents and our kids?
Yes, I had one client who came to a retreat that I did, and they had been put on this pedestal that they were paraded around to lots of different churches about what it looks like and what an amazing family they were, because they had adopted a sibling group of 3 from another country, and they parented for a couple of years, and it was falling apart, and they had no help, and then they were shunned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's for me. So like my heart, I'm not a foster adoptive parent, but my area is, I did trauma counseling with kids in the foster care system, and I just saw that need for support in such a tangible way that I was like, more people like me need to be supporting families. Because what I see too is the foster and adoptive parents recognize the importance, but you guys are so spread thin and overwhelmed and burnt out. And then you're also trying to support one another, right? And I was just like, our support systems need to show up. You don't need to be a foster adoptive parent to come alongside and love and support a family well, And so that was, for me, I was like, we have to do something. We need to really equip and empower the local church to do this. I've heard so many heartbreaking stories too of parents that were, they go to church on Sunday, and then the Sunday school pastor would say like, hey, we can't meet the needs of your child. So either you need to come in the classroom or they can't come. And I'm like, that should never be the message of the church. The message of the church should be, we love you so much, and we love your kids so much that we are going to get equipped and empowered in trauma-informed care so that we can love you and be the best we can be for your kids on Sunday, And that wasn't the message of the church. It's the flip of that. And so I feel like we're trying to turn a ship here.
And it's a small group trying to turn that ship. But, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
For adoptive parents and foster parents, which I was never a foster parent, but
Yeah.
for adoptive parents, I was in the trenches for years and years and a couple of decades. And it is so trying. It is so hard. I ended up with PTSD. My family almost fell apart, and we're still recovering, you know. And there's not very many people out there like you who are not part of it themselves and just willing to step in and say, you know what, even if I don't adopt, and I don't know whether you ever will or not, you may, who knows, but that's not even your story at this point. But you see the need, and you're stepping in so that those of us who are doing it can continue.
Exactly.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, I think that's a huge heartbeat for me, is like support systems, that any person that says yes to the adoption or foster care journey, that, you know, the grandparents, aunts and uncles, friends would say, hey, we are going to become trauma informed. We're going to do our part as well to be able to love you well. That churches this would just be the norm. This would be standard, because there are so many Christians that do adoption and foster care. And so, you know, I know churches have, you know, sometimes they don't have all the resources. They don't necessarily have, you know, a critical mass of families to start a ministry, you know, but really there's so many different ways churches can come alongside families and support them well, that I think part of what we're trying to do is really empower the church to understand what those roles could be, you know.
Well, and I think also I always wanted to say to churches, do not host an Orphan Sunday if you're not prepared to walk those families for the next 20, 25 years through financially, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and provide respite and uphold that family. Because you ask these people to do it with these heart-wrenching stories, and, you know, we feel called. Our hearts are moved. And so we think, well, we have the resources and we have the love, and I have an extra bedroom. You know, hey, we can go do this. And all you're told is, it just takes a little love.
Yeah, which is not, love is great, but it's absolutely not enough.
It's one part of many.
Yeah. I think that's what's so complicated too, right? Is I think there are times where, there's this compelling, like, we know the cause of the fatherless is near and dear to the heart of God. And there are people that feel very compelled to step into that journey and to say yes, right? But I think we know now that, you know, love isn't enough, right? Mm-hmm. And when we can empathize and really understand what our kiddos have experienced and what they're working through, and that there is no quick fix to that, you know, I think we can have a posture that's a lot more like, hey, how do I be the hands and feet in Christ to you and your family, as an organization, as a church, as a support system, as a friend? You know, what are the ways to do that? Because these kids are worth it. They're precious and they're awesome. And so we have to get past that judgment and criticism, or, you know, seeing a kid in the grocery store that's throwing a huge fit that lasts forever. You don't know what they've been through.
Right. And,
you know?
and also to the mother who's standing there with that child, you have no idea what she's been through. And so judging her and looking at her like she's a horrible parent when, you know, she may be traumatized herself. It's like we need to step in alongside the parents too, which is more the side that I come from. You come from more the side of helping the kids, and it takes both, because this is a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But and I think what, you know, Carrie, you were touching on was really important. When we started the Replanted ministry, we said we weren't going to even host an adoption or foster care 101 night. We weren't even going to encourage parents to consider the journey until we had a support system we could plug them into. And so the first thing we started with the ministry was small groups for families to connect and be in relationship and be supported.
Who are already doing it. Yeah,
exactly. And then, but also to use those groups and those relationships for people considering it. And so we had families that were just considering whether they wanted to adopt or foster, join these groups. And now they're on a different trajectory, right? Because they have support right off the bat.
Right.
And they're getting this experience too, where they're hearing this eyes wide open part of the journey, right? There's a lot of joy and beauty in the journey, but there is also a lot of pain and grief and loss, right? And if we don't hold both of those things, we're doing a disservice to us and to our kiddos. Right. And so then parents are going in eyes wide open. And so their expectations aren't like, love is enough, right? There's more like, okay, hey, these kids have been through a lot, you know, to parent, I need to be able to, you know, do trauma-informed care, and I need to,
these and it may trigger me.
And it's okay.
And I need to figure out how to deal with my own stuff. Yeah. Absolutely.
Exactly. So I think, I think we know a little bit more now than we did before. And, especially me as a therapist, I know that having a support is the number one predictor of, somebody's life trajectory changing. And so we know that can help families thrive. And so, getting that, unfortunately for a lot of our families, they haven't had support for a long time.
Right.
But I think, changing that kind of that platform, I would love it if churches and organizations where it was so the norm that post-placement support was part of the journey, that like everyone was supported and everyone was taken care of and cared for well and understood well.
Yeah.
I think we have a little ways to go still, but
little ways. Yeah. And, ours was 20 years ago. And I look at what's happened in the 20 years, and it is so different. We heard a little bit about attachment, and you might, some kids have attachment issues, but it's really not that big of a deal. And it's very rare. And it's like, how could they not?
Yeah.
How could they not, when, we know now that attachment happens in the first 3 years of life.
Yeah.
If there's a stable, consistent caregiver, and many of these kids never had that. So how could they not have attachment issues? But we're adoptive and foster parents are sometimes told, love is enough. And well, if a child cannot accept or receive the love from you and you're not prepared for that, it's traumatic.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you don't get those standard like affirmations that you typically get, the I love yous and the hugs and absolutely. It is so traumatic. And I think too, like, I would say to a lot of foster parents, like every single child in foster care has experienced trauma. They would not be in foster care if they hadn't.
Yes.
And so whether you got that baby at birth,
newborn,
they were maybe substance exposed, shaken baby, something happened there. And even that a separation, right? When we know babies in utero are experiencing their mom's hormones, their mom's voice, various things like that. And that separation is traumatic.
Whether
and so
it's foster or adoption.
Exactly. And so I think you're right. We know more now than we did too about how trauma affects our kiddos. And that healing journey is just, it's just like, if somebody breaks their leg, like everyone's got a different healing process with that, right? It's not a standard, like, okay, everyone's good to go in 2 weeks, that's not reality. And especially when it comes to our emotional and spiritual and mental health, there's so many layers to it. And I think that's the thing too, I think churches are very excited and like when families say yes to adoption and foster care, right? But there's so many emotions in it, right? Like, what about the child's first family and how do we have those conversations? And, foster care, there's a lot of limbo period you're living in. Are they going to be reunifying with their family? Aren't they? What does that mean? What does this look like?
Birthdays, Mother's Day, all of those things. Yeah.
Adoption, not knowing any of your child's history maybe, right? Like there's so many layers too as well that I think sometimes people not in the adoption or foster care journey don't really understand.
These
that
are
you're
questions
always
they've never had to think. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I think
what caused you to move into this line of work? Well, what's your story?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, it's not hugely glamorous. I knew that I wanted to work with kids. So I had done, growing up, I was an athlete and I had done a lot of sports camps and worked with kids. And so I just always had a heart to get in there with kids. I know relationships really important and mentoring. And we know, I think there was that Harvard study done that one mentor, one trusted person outside of the family network can drastically change the trajectory of a child's life. And so I just really wanted kids to know, like, you are important. You don't need to wait till you grow up to become an adult. And that's when you have value and worth and, can contribute. I really wanted kids to know that their voice was so important at an early age. And so I was looking for a job and one of my friends was working at a foster care agency. It's like, hey, Jen, you might actually really like this. And so I interviewed and got the job, and then I started working with the kids, and my heart was just right away. I was like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. My heart, this is my heartbeat area. And, God just really laid it on my heart too, that the church needed to be doing more and organizations needed to be doing more to support our families well, because the parents need it and they deserve it, and also because it would have tremendous impact on the kids as well. And so, I'm originally from Canada, so I was born and raised there. I came to Wheaton just thinking I was going to get my graduate degree and head back. And so here I am still, which is kind of funny, but it was very clear that I was supposed to stay here. And this was kind of like my life's calling.
Well, I think it's so cool because it really does, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of visioning and what you've done, which we're going to talk about more in just a little bit, but that takes a lot of organization and strength and people and all of that. And if you were parenting one of these kids or a group of a Google of them, a gaggle of them, you wouldn't have the time or energy to be doing this. So it's pretty amazing. I just think that's so cool how God does that. It's not what you're doing right now, but you can come alongside and make it so much better for everybody else. Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the things, because people always ask me, like, are you going to adopt or foster, right? Like, your heart is so about this. And, my husband and I talk about fostering someday. We're really passionate about like reunifying families when that's able to happen. But I also felt like I don't think I could support and love and create the support for families in the same way. And so right now I feel like I just need to be all in on this because this is so important for our families to thrive. And so this is where I'll be for now. That is awesome. Oh my goodness. And you're fairly newly married too, right?
Yeah, 2 years in. So
And, okay, how did you and Josh, it's Josh, right?
It's Josh, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Josh. I thought so. No. But all of a sudden, do you ever have those little brain things where like, is that the right name?
No, you're good. It's Josh.
Where did you guys meet and how did he's interested in this too?
He is, yeah. So we actually met at a conference. There's this conference called APA, the American Psychological Association Conference. And he was a collaborator on a grant that we had. And we were doing a lot of research around the effects of trauma on kids and families who have experienced natural disasters. And so
you guys are a fun couple.
I know, right? Yeah. So we actually were having this big team meeting and we met there and he asked me if I wanted to hang out that night. And we went on dates like almost every day and married.
You go.
So
there you go. That's so awesome.
He is a psychologist, and a professor at the University of North Texas, and so he does a lot of writing. So he is really passionate about just like integrating spiritual and mental health and helping empower people to be able to provide self-care to themselves. And then he also one of his things that he's contributed to the ministry is he wrote a book with his dad actually called Helping Groups Heal, which is the foundation of the training we do for our groups, because we really want our groups to be, safe, healthy, intimate, awesome, vulnerable places for our families to be together. But we know that a lot of our parents are coming in with really hard stories. And so it's important that we have leaders that are really equipped and ready to enter into those stories well and not, sometimes parents, they've been rejected so much that it takes a lot to actually want to be honest about what your experience has been. And so we want people to always know that, hey, you are always safe and welcome in a replanted group wherever you are, and that you are loved and it doesn't matter what's going on. So important. His book.
Because it can get so hard and so ugly. And if you feel like you're the only one who's in that really dark place and everyone is plugging away and hopeful and you're really losing hope, you need a place to go where you're still going to be able to be accepted.
Yeah. And Carrie, you probably can resonate with this too. Like we had a group launch out in the East Coast, and we had done the facilitator training with our leaders, and then we did a call afterwards just to see how it went. And one of the leaders said, like, the very first group, they had a family come and say, like, we are so overwhelmed and at wit's end that we don't know if we can do this anymore. And we're considering relinquishing our parental rights, right? How do you walk alongside that family well in a way that doesn't say, like, shame on you for considering that, or, hey, what can we do to support you? Because even that message is saying, like, you're not doing enough, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and that's my main coaching,
yeah, yeah,
and when I first get a client, it's one of my first questions is, how far gone is mom?
yeah,
Which sounds crazy, but it's like, it's really, really difficult to heal trauma in a home when the child walks in and mom's trauma gets triggered, and then the child looks at mom and that triggers the child. And it's like, how do we
yeah,
heal all of that in the same home? And do you even have what it takes
yeah,
and it doesn't mean do you have it like because you're so smart or because you're spiritually astute enough. It's like, trauma is a physical thing, and
yeah,
it really impacts us physiologically in our body. And
yeah,
sometimes the trauma can be so devastating that for anybody to heal, there needs to be a placement so that
yeah,
everybody has a chance. And it's a
yeah,
horrible thing we've walked through it, and I sometimes walk through it with others, but not
yeah,
always. People are scared to call me because they think that's where I'm going to lead them. It's like, no, I just want to help you assess, where are
yeah,
you at? What have you tried?
yeah,
What other resources would you need? What other supports would you need? And even if we were to give you everything that you needed, would that be enough?
yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes the answer is no.
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
needs to be okay.
Yeah,
It just does. As
yeah.
ugly as it is, that needs to be okay sometimes.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, right? Like, how do you hold that space of like, hey, like, I'm sorry you're in this process of like even, discerning that right now, that must be really hard. Like how,
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that for me, we're always about like, we're like empathy first,
Right.
right?
Well, just
Validate
like
empathy. Like,
TBRI, you've got to
yeah,
connect a little before you say anything
exactly.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But like, how do you hold those spaces of like helping someone process that without shaming them?
Right.
Is there something we can do to support you? But also like, hey, we love you no matter what you decide.
Right.
Like, and same with
Right.
the kids, right? Like, how do we always give our kiddos that message too? And so, I think that's why it's really important that when you're creating groups for families, that you're making sure they're always safe places.
Yeah.
Because sometimes this is the first time our parents are stepping out and feeling that safety to even talk about their stories.
Well,
And
and I do know that sometimes
yeah,
when a family is really struggling with something really difficult and they bring it into a group, if the leaders aren't skilled,
yeah,
it can really trigger the other people in the group. Like, uh-oh, we don't want to have to listen to this because what if it might happen to us? What if we have to do that? I don't want to deal with this. We just
yeah,
want only the positive in here. Can we just move forward? And so it takes a skilled leader to be
yeah,
able to, like you said,
yeah,
hold both
yeah.
of those. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why like Josh and I complement each other really well in that way as we're supporting families. And we actually wrote a book together on the ministry, like Replanted, faith-based support for foster and adoptive
Hold it up
families.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And we're actually going to do another podcast here in just a minute. And we're going to talk a lot more about the book, about your
Yeah.
conferences, and all of the ways that
All the
you.
support.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
let's get into some of the nitty gritty about how this actually works. Are you
Yeah.
up for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great place to end this one. So
Yeah.
let's take a break here, and we'll come back and do another one. All right?
Yeah. That
Okay.
sounds good.
Well, thanks so
Awesome.
much, Jen.
Yeah,
And thank
thanks
you
for-
all for joining us, and we'll be right back again with Broken and Brilliant.